Back in my younger days, I was attacked by some kind of creature that disguises itself as human. I know whatever it was that attacked me was evil, right to the core. And if it wasn't for a stranger that was brave enough to defend me, I probably wouldn't be here to tell you this story now. What I'm going to tell you over this email has been something I thought about every day for over 20 years now. I've gone to therapy for it. I've gotten over the fear that I've felt for a decade, but there's not a day that goes by that I don't at least have a fleeting thought of that creature that almost killed me. My name isn't really important for the sake of this story. Just know that I'm a female, average height, on the slender side, not someone that could fight off an attacker by myself. I was 23 years old when this happened in 1999, and it happened in Poughkeepsie, New York. It was on a normal street, in a normal neighborhood that was quiet and peaceful. It happened in a well-lit area, and I've never heard of anything happening there before or since I had my encounter. I was at this party to celebrate one of my friend's birthdays. I'd gone there with a few other friends and my roommate one night, and we were all just laughing and having a good time. I kept noticing this guy staring at me from across the room. He kept smiling at me and then turning away like he was shy or something. And then later I would catch him looking at me again, so I'd smile back, and there didn't seem anything off about him, at first. He was tall, probably a little over 6 feet, and he was pale. He had black hair that was cut short, and he was very attractive. He was dressed well, wore all black, but not in a creepy way. He had black dress pants on and a black button-up short-sleeve shirt. It actually looked pretty good against his complexion and the color of his hair. I was single and wasn't against meeting anyone, so the more our eyes met, the more I smiled back at him. About half an hour of this went by, and finally he came up to me and made a move. The first thing I noticed up close were his eyes. They were this really light blue color that looked like they could pierce right through you. He said hello to me and introduced himself as Michael. He had an American accent, not from New York. More like West Coast. He had this smile that looked like it could knock the boots right off of you, and this air about him. He was just extremely charming. But there was something about him that I didn't like a feeling I was being hunted or something. It's kind of hard to explain. I had these warning bells going off in my head, telling me not to follow this guy anywhere, and to definitely not be alone with him. This dread just came up out of the pit of my stomach, and this fear came over me. It was weird and scary at the time how my body reacted to him, but looking back on it now, it was amazing that my brain just knew something was off about him, and it probably ended up saving my life. I ended up telling him I had a boyfriend, and apologized for sending the wrong signal to him. He was cool about it, told me it wasn't any trouble, and then he walked off. I didn't actually see him again after that. I guessed he left the house and the party. I went back to having fun and had a drink or two with my friends, but not too much to where I couldn't drive home. I was my own ride and didn't want to risk drinking too much and not being able to drive my car home. A couple hours later, I decided to go home since it was getting late and I had to get up early in the next morning. I declined my friend's offer of walking me out to my car, even though she basically insisted on walking out there with me. I didn't want her to have to walk back alone, and it was just a block to my car anyway, so I knew that I'd be fine. I often wonder if that thing would have singled me out and attacked me if there was more than one of us walking to my car. But at the same time, I wonder if he would have attacked my friend on the way back to the party if she did walk me to my car. Thoughts like this can drive you crazy, but there's things I think of all the time like this. As I was walking to my car, I started to get that same feeling of dread coming over me. It was like my body got cold and I could feel the pit of my stomach rising up again. It was that nervousness that you get before you stand in front of a crowd to give a speech, but more in a life or death situation. As I was walking to my car, I was extremely frightened and nervous. I tried to brush it off as my imagination. I kept thinking to myself, well, you are a pretty small woman walking to your car at night. Of course you should be scared. I tried to push it out of my mind, but that feeling wouldn't go away, and I started walking faster and faster to my car. I got to my car and stuck the key in the lock to unlock the door, And that's when Michael, if that's his real name at all, came up to me again. He asked me if he could have a ride home since he lost his own keys, but I declined and told him that I had to get going. He asked one more time, and I told him I wasn't giving a stranger a ride home, especially at night. He seemed irritated, like he wasn't used to being rejected. I opened my door, but he grabbed the top of it and said my name. Only, I never told him my name. I know that he could have heard my friends calling me my name, but the way he said it just sounded like he was taunting me with the fact that he knew what to call me. I tried to pry the door open from his hand, but he was so strong. The next part is the part that has haunted me since then, because his face contorted into this thing right in front of me. It's extremely hard to describe him without reliving that moment, and I'm shaking just typing it now. But here goes. His mouth was wider than it could possibly be. It looked like it was stretched across his whole face. His front two teeth looked normal, but the incisors behind them and the canines looked long and pointed. His skin looked even paler than it had at the party, almost a gray color. His nose stayed the same, very human, but his eyes had this red color on them. It's a color that a human being just doesn't have. I don't know what he was. A demon? A vampire? Maybe they're even one and the same. I don't know. I know in some mythologies they are. I don't even want to know. He grabbed me by my arms as I started screaming. I was absolutely terrified by what I saw and what was happening. I thought I was going to die. He pushed me up against the back door and started making this hissing sound and this low growling noise. His breath smelled like death, like decaying flesh. His mouth was open so wide, wider than a human could possibly open their mouth. I was trying to fight him off. I was trying to beat on his chest with my fists, trying to punch at him, but nothing I did seemed to faze him. All of this only took about 10 seconds from the time he changed to when I was trying to fight back. He was just so strong. I was screaming, trying to call for anyone to help me. He tried to cover my mouth. His hand felt like ice, and he had these long fingernails. They weren't sharp, just long and yellowish. When his hand touched my face, it felt like my whole body dropped in temperature. I even tried to bite his hand, but I couldn't get a good grip. Like saving grace, this guy ran up to help me, yelling at this thing to get away from me. He grabbed that creature around the neck from behind and wrapped his arm around him, but this thing pushed him down like he was a rag doll. Michael took a second to look at this man and hiss at him before he turned his attention back to me. I could see the fear in this guy's eyes, but he still got back up and hit this thing in the head with the bottom of his fist. Michael hissed again and swatted the guy right in the face with the back of his hand. He tried to get in between me and Michael, and tried swinging at him, but Michael just moved out of the way. I heard more noises coming from down the street, and saw 2 more men heading in our direction, asking if everything was okay. I screamed to them that we needed help, and they started running over to us. Michael snarled at me. He actually snarled, just like a dog, then turned around and started to run off. He seemed to drop down to all fours when he ran, almost like Sabretooth in the Wolverine movie. It wasn't human. The 2 other guys reached us and asked if we were okay. I told them that I think we might need medical attention. The guy that saved me agreed, and we ended up at the hospital. He had a broken wrist. There were other bruises and cuts on both of us, but nothing too serious, and we seemed to make it out alive. We filed a report with the police and said that we were attacked, but they seemed skeptical when I started to describe what Michael looked like, and what happened, and how he moved when he ran away. I don't blame them. If I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't believe the story either. But it did happen, and Michael wasn't human. My roommate ended up meeting me at the hospital, and I ended up staying overnight for evaluation, because they thought I might be in shock of what I had witnessed. I ended up staying with that guy that saved me the next day. I'll keep his name out of it too, and just refer to him as Superman. He was admitted for a possible concussion and the broken wrist. They wanted to evaluate him and do a few more x-rays before they discharged him. We spent hours talking about what happened. At first, I told him I thought I was going crazy, and I described what I saw, but he took my hand and gently told me that if I was going crazy, so was he. As far as he was concerned, he fought off a monster that was attacking me the night before. It wasn't human. It just wasn't human, is what he told me. Me and Superman are still friends to this day. We're very close, and we talk daily, even though we don't live in the same cities as each other anymore. We're both still in New York, and we try to have dinner with each other at least a few times a month. We haven't talked about that night much in a long time, but when we do, you could tell that both of us still get very nervous. It was actually Superman that convinced me to type this up to you. I know you wanted to do something with this story for your 200th episode and actually have me record my encounter in an interview, but I don't want to talk about it. Typing it up on here was bad enough. I don't know what it was that I saw. I don't want to know what it was that I saw. Superman always says it was a vampire. I know there's things out there that aren't human, but I don't know if it's a vampire in the traditional sense. I don't know what I believe. I just know I wear my rosary and never take it off. Thank you for helping me share my story. It's not something that I talk about lightheartedly, and I hope nobody else ever has an encounter with Michael, because if he is a vampire, what else is out there that we think of as just bad dreams? My two very stupid friends took something from a gravesite thinking it was a cool stone, but they didn't tell me when they first came over, upset and in a panic. It was so late I was already asleep, and they just came over desperate for my help. They said they didn't know what to do or who to talk to, except for me. I only found out they took something the next day, because they actually slept on my lounge, because they were too scared to leave. Now keep in mind, they were both grown adults with good jobs and backgrounds. Stupid and reckless, they decided together it would be fun to go to an old cemetery and walk around late that night. Then they took something that I think was part of a headstone that was broken off. It was sizable and dark. Then, about 2 hours later, that's when they came over to my house. Both of them looked frazzled, scared, and really worried, and I knew that they had done something wrong. I told them to calm down, despite myself feeling this awkward feeling. The feeling I felt was just awful. I went to sleep and had probably the worst out-of-body experience that I have ever had. I'm a bit hesitant to even talk about it, but here it goes. I saw this very tall creature that was a rusty red color all over. He had two things coming out of his head and was just standing across the room, glaring at me. He was about 7 to 8 feet tall, and his legs were human, but not from the knees down. It sounds bizarre, but to me, they looked almost like they were backwards legs, sort of. He was very muscular and frightening. Then I heard both of my friends screaming, one in each room of my house. Their screams were like they were being tortured. This thing that was across the room was just glaring at me. And then it moved quickly towards me, and bang, I woke up. Then I ran out of my room and fell into the hallway. Then I actually woke up in bed. I've never seen anything or read anything about any kind of creature that looked like that, but this scared the crap out of me. The next day, both of them stayed all day with me. It was December 31st, New Year's Eve, and I had plans to go out, but they wouldn't leave. They were both so scared and just kept saying to me, "You can help us. Just help us." So I decided I should just take them with me to the New Year's Eve hotspot that I was going to. And on the way there, I felt very, very hot and stifled, like I couldn't breathe. This went on for about 5 minutes, and as each moment passed, I felt like I was burning up until I looked at them and said, "What have you done? What is in this car with us?" That's when they both told me about the stone they took. Immediately, I said, "You have to take it back. You're both idiots. Why would you take something from a grave? They just kept talking incoherently and at the same time. I said, okay, you have to take it back, but I'll come with you. We all decided to enjoy the celebrations first. I told them they weren't ruining my night. But that's when it got much, much worse. We were walking through the crowd. There was a lot of people there. All of a sudden, I felt this awful, ominous feeling, like we were being watched. And immediately, I looked up to the top of this roof of a shop. And there, along its walkway, I saw him. This thing that looked like a man. But I knew this wasn't any man. I didn't tilt my head up, just my eyes. I purposely chose not to alert them with my head movement. Instead, I told them, hold my hands and do not let go under any circumstances. Then we continued to walk through the crowd, holding each other's hands. That's when I both asked them, do you feel that? They both said yes. I said, can you see what I see? And they both said no. But the guy that I was with motioned his head upwards in the direction the thing was standing. I knew he could at least sense this thing. Then, in literally a second, this thing, or man, or whatever it was standing about 15 meters in front of us. Just standing there looking in our direction. I told them he's in front of us, and I halted them both, and we stopped and stood still. I have no idea how this thing got from the roof to in front of us. No idea at all. They still couldn't see him, but I could. I saw every centimeter of his face, his clothing, and I was watching the way he was scanning the crowd. I felt like he was looking right through us, like he couldn't see us. I was praying in my mind by then, and he stood there for about 2 minutes, looking right through us. He was very, very tall. I'd put him at about 7 foot something, and he was very, very handsome. He had a perfectly chiseled face, and blue eyes, and dark hair. He was wearing a long black jacket and black boots. Now, keep in mind, it was summer weather too. About 40 degrees Celsius, which is about 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Just typical summer weather here. I watched him. I didn't take my eyes off him. The girl that I was with started crying and shaking, and I told her she had to be calm. We were okay. I didn't think he could see us. She stilled for a while, but still looked like she was overwhelmed with fear. I still didn't take my eyes off him. Not once. And then, as quickly as he was there, he was gone. He literally vanished into thin air. He was by a group of 6 people, and then he was gone. I looked around the people, up the street, across the street. He was gone. Totally gone. Then I said to them, this isn't good. We need to get to a church right now. So we headed to my friend's car, and we drove around looking for a church, but they were all closed. Which is typical, especially this late at night. Then, the last church we went to was one of the biggest and oldest Catholic churches in the city, the Church of England. That's where we saw a priest. Of course, at the time, the church was empty, but the priest that looked after it was there, and we talked to him for about 5 minutes before he ran inside the church and grabbed his mobile phone. He was standing about 10 meters away and talking on the phone. Another 5 to 8 minutes, 3 more cars pulled up. Then about 7 priests hopped out. They all got out and stood around me and the girl that was with me. They stood in a circle and chanted something, but I don't know what. Then they took us inside. They did and told us various things. The head priest could see him standing just outside the brick wall that surrounded the church, standing near a big old tree. It stood there for about 4 hours. It didn't move, just stood still. Most of the other priests that night couldn't see him. I know the head priest could. I asked him where it was, and he pointed to confirm what I was seeing. He said he could see it too, just near that big old tree on the other side of the brick wall. That's when I knew that this thing that we were looking at was a fallen angel. The priest agreed with me and nodded and said we needed to go and stay inside. When we were in the church, all the priests gathered around. One of the priests was reading the Bible, as they all took turns reading for about half an hour, each in succession. One of the priests slammed the Bible closed and said, "It doesn't matter. You're going to hell." I don't know about you, but I've never heard a Catholic priest, or any priest for that matter, speak like that. And I knew immediately there was something wrong with him. So did the other priests. They all stared at him in shock. Then two of the priests grabbed each of his arms and said, "You need to leave this room now." And they took him into another room. We didn't see him the rest of the night. But the other priests were with him for about 3 hours. That one priest never came back. But one of the other priests told me, when someone is weak, they're susceptible to evil influences, and said that priest needed to be taken away because he was too weak to deal with the thing that we were facing. What I'm telling you is 100% truth. I know it sounds crazy, but it all happened. When it came time to leave the church grounds, myself and 3 priests went outside to see if that thing was still there, and it wasn't. But still, the priests wouldn't allow us to leave because they said it still wasn't safe, and they advised us to wait it out. We arrived at that church a little before 12 a.m. We stayed there until after 5 a.m. Finally, when the others came outside, we all stood on the brick porch area and waited in silence. We were all out there, standing in a long line with a meter or so between us. I sat down on the bricks and waited. The priest stood with us, and then all of a sudden, we all heard singing. It was a lady that was singing. It was soft, but loud enough for all of us to hear, and it wasn't someone next to us. Her voice was so beautiful. We all heard it. I started crying. So did one of the other priests. Then the head priest said, "It's safe for you to leave." And we left. That day, they took those stones back. The head priest had told me when we were outside earlier that he saw that something had fallen, and this thing was dangerous. That's what confirmed to me it was a fallen angel. That was my first thought when I saw him. He was so beautiful and handsome, but the feeling was nothing but malevolence and rage. I spoke to the girl about this last year, and she got upset and didn't want to talk about it. The guy said he'd never experienced anything like that, ever in his life. I truly believe that those stones they took were the catalyst. Why? I don't know. Why stones? I'm not sure still to this day. This happened when I was 20 years old, and now I'm 40. I may have mentioned previously that when the priests arrived, they stood in a circle and chanted in tongues or some other language while around us. But the thing that struck me as odd sometime after that was they were acting like soldiers, that they'd all been well trained and equipped to deal with this sort of thing. All that just makes me wonder. This was one of the most frightening nights of my life. And the night before I had that OBE, I saw something that no living person or passed away person should ever see. It haunted me for years, and still as I write this, I get this feeling. Like I said, every word above is true. If you have any other idea what this thing could be other than a fallen angel, please let me know. As for me, I'm actually pretty boring. I'm normal and quiet for the most part, and I purposely keep it that way. I guess I keep to myself because I want to stay balanced and clear-minded. Some things scare me, and like the other experience I've had, they can last for a long time. I don't do any media, no paranormal investigations. I don't mess with any of those things, because I don't like having these experiences. They're pretty messed up. But I still feel like I was built this way for something. And what that is, who knows? It scares me sometimes. I've questioned myself a lot and spoken to quite a few church leaders from lots of different denominations in an attempt to get the answers, but I never do. The first time I approached a priest by myself, I was 8 years old. After school, I rode my bike about 4 kilometers from my house all by myself. I went to this church and just walked in and sat down in the front seat. The priest came and sat with me, and I began asking him questions about who we are as people, what we're doing here, things like that. He gave me unhelpful answers and kind of shrugged me off because I was a little kid. I got back on my bike and rode home. I was 8 when I began asking questions that weren't typical for someone my age. I used to do weird things too in primary school. Around 7 years old, I would look at my hands and watch them move and feel that this was the strangest thing ever. I would just open and close them and open and close them and watch in absolute awe at what I could do. That's strange, I know it. But it's like I was in a suit, looking at myself in a new outfit sort of thing. In class, we used to play together as kids on the school park, and it was covered in prickles. The other kids used to play a game, and I remember playing at least twice. Both times, someone would say, "Let's take off our shoes and run across the park," and the first one to the end was the winner. With no shoes on, all of us would start walking across, and constantly the other kids would be ouch, 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 walking across the prickled grass. Except me. I would just focus on the grass in front of me and say in my mind, "There are no prickles. Nothing will hurt my feet." I never got pricked. And some of the other kids would be to the point that they were bleeding from the prickles stuck in them. That happened twice when I was 7 to 8 years old. After each time, I would say thank you quietly. Just thank you to something or someone. Like as a child, I knew there was someone there stopping me from getting hurt. I know it sounds strange, but these weren't isolated incidences. So yes, I have been a little strange since I was young, and there are other experiences that I'll tell you about, other things that I've seen. People would think I belong in a lunatic asylum if I told them everything, so I'm very selective when I tell people things. My name is Brittany, and I'm your average teenager. Lately, I've been seeing these black figures, and it all started way back in 2012. My dad worked at a dairy farm, and the farmers he worked for let him live on site in a trailer that wasn't too fancy. It really all began when his boss told him that one of his other coworkers wanted to trade houses. You know, basically house swap. So of course, my dad asked why, since it wasn't a common thing for anybody to do. And his boss told him that the coworker said he'd been seeing spirits and they'd been keeping him awake, so he wanted to get out of there. Not really believing in any of this kind of crap, my dad eventually agreed to switch houses because he didn't really believe his coworker. The first night I slept there, though, I felt like something was watching me. I just assumed it was normal for me to feel alone and scared because of all the other houses we ever lived in, I had always shared a room with my sister. Now, we both had our own rooms, so I guess I just wasn't used to being alone like that. That's why it was easy to shrug off, and eventually I just went to sleep. A week later, everything felt normal, and everything was just happy. I loved being with my dad, and I know my sister did too, so we were all just enjoying our time together. That was before I saw something, though. I saw this black figure just outside of my bedroom window. It scared the hell out of me. I ran out of my room and into my sister's room, and she asked what the hell was going on. I told her I saw something, but then when I thought about it, I told her that it was probably just a shadow, because I didn't want to seem like a wimp or paranoid around her. I guess I just didn't want to be teased by her, so again I shrugged off my encounter. 1 year later, we moved out to another new house, right by the reservation. I didn't know about skinwalkers and all that crazy stuff back then, and when I saw these dark figures again, I really got scared, because I started to remember the shadow creature that was outside of my window a year before that. I wondered why I kept seeing them. I just tried to shrug it off like normal though, because I guess I just didn't appreciate what they were. So far, the only one that I was seeing could have just been my imagination. But a week later though, my sister told me she saw one of the exact same black shadow figures too. It was right across the road, and this one actually had glowing red eyes. I was very creeped out because never once had I told her about the black figures that I saw. Remember, I just shrugged it off as shadows to her. But when she confirmed that she saw the same thing, I had to share my experiences with her. Though I've never experienced them having those weird eyes before. And then again, 1 week after that, my sister and I stayed up all night hoping to scare the hell out of my dad when he came home from work. He worked the night shift, and he'd get home about 5 in the morning. He pulled into the driveway that morning, and the first thing we noticed was that he was driving way faster than normal. We saw him literally run up to the door, and we could hear the keys jingling around outside. It was like he was in a state of panic or something. It sounded like something beat us to scaring him, if you asked me. He opened the door, and my stupid sister continued to scare him with the prank by jumping out at him, trying to surprise him or catch him off guard. My dad literally screamed and almost punched her. I turned the light on at the right moment, I guess, because if I didn't, I'm sure my dad would have knocked her out. We asked what was wrong. He said when he was driving home, he saw this tall creature standing there on all 4 legs. He thought it was a coyote at first, but as he drove closer, he saw that it was far too large and too tall to be a coyote. He doesn't know what it was. He thinks it was something demonic. He drove out of there as fast as he possibly could. So then, me and my sister got a little freaked out. Honestly, I'm starting to think that all these sightings are connected somehow. Maybe they're all the work of a skinwalker. Maybe something else, but I know all 3 of us have had an encounter now, at least once. So I know it's not my imagination. And I know I'm not crazy. I'd just like to know why they're following my family around. My sister died this morning. She had a heart attack. She was only 23 years old. Normally, this kind of thing is extremely upsetting, but this is mostly due to the suddenness of a person you know so well leaving you forever. One day they're here in this world, and the next they're gone. For me, though, it wasn't that upsetting. I knew she was going to die. What's really disturbing is what happened the night before. It was late, probably about 2 in the morning, and I was driving home from work. Work's been really busy lately. I didn't get off until about 1. On the way home, I generally take the back highway. It's a pretty straight road, and the cops never patrol that route, so I can usually do about 20 over the speed limit or so. The road itself, I would say, is creepy. It has dead trees spanning the entire roadway, and there's no streets or traffic lights in any form except the moon. For the most part, this road in question is covered in a foggy mist due to the presence of a swamp about 500 meters off the road. I've traveled this road hundreds of times at this time of night, and I've never seen anyone on it. At least until last night. I was about halfway through the drive home when I saw a woman standing on the side of the road. Concerned, I pulled over and got out of my car, and then I approached her. I saw she had long, gray, and frayed hair that touched the small of her back. She was wearing a black dress that was dirty and tattered at the bottom. As I got closer, I called out to her, but I didn't get a response. I got even closer and called her again. And this is when this woman, or whatever you want to call her, slowly started to turn around. And when she did, my stomach dropped completely. This woman's face appeared badgered and dirty. I saw scars and moles and discoloration all over her pale white face. Her eyes were as black as the night that surrounded her, and she just gazed at me. Her lips were dry and filled with cracks and a little bit of dried blood, but still it formed a smile. I started walking backwards, and the woman took a few steps forwards. The stench of a long, decomposing body hit my nose and made me gag. The frame of her body was small and frail, and the dress she was wearing was covered in what appeared to me to be fresh blood. She stood there for several seconds before lifting her bony hand and pointing a finger at me, and she gave off this blood-curdling scream that felt like it could shatter my eardrums and the glass at my vehicle. This continued for about 10 seconds, and then she just stopped. She muttered something under her breath and began to walk off the highway and into the swamp. Needless to say, I absolutely did not follow her. In fact, I got in my car and took off as fast as I could. I wanted to get as far away from her as possible. You see, I knew who she was and why she was there, because I've seen her before. I first saw her when I was 6 years old. I remember waking up late in the middle of the night to tapping on the window. I opened my blinds to see the very same woman, not a day older or younger, staring at me from the outside. She stared at me for several seconds before mimicking that same wail that she used the night before my sister died. And then she just vanished. I'm not talking she walked away. She just disappeared. The next morning after that, my dad died in a car accident. Then I saw her again when I was 14, walking home from school. I saw her across the road with the same exact dress. I got a whiff of that same smell. I saw the same eyes. And once again, that horrible sound. That horrible wailing. And the next morning, my uncle hung himself in our garage. When I was 19, she appeared again with the same routine, and you can probably guess what happened next. I spent a couple years researching this woman, who she was and why she was following me, what she wanted. Finally, I figured out the answer. She was a banshee. Her purpose was simple. Her presence, accompanied by that blood-curdling scream, all of it was a message. Someone close to you has or is going to die very soon. You can't stop it. The fate of that doomed person is already sealed by this banshee's cry. From what I've read, banshees are usually attached to families, and specifically to one individual person per generation. They're apparently physically harmless, or so I've been told, but I don't know if I believe that this is true. When I saw her most recently, she muttered something under her scream. I knew what she said. I've been deaf in one ear almost all my life, and I've learned to read lips. I know what she said. She told me that I was next. This may be the last thing I ever write. The people listening to this may be the last people to hear this story. I know it's coming. There's nothing I can do but accept it. I guess I've made peace with it. I always knew that one day she'd come for me. It doesn't suck any less, but at least I got a warning. Most people aren't so lucky. All my life, I've been a little sensitive. Feeling certain vibes, and in certain rooms, I get gut feelings about something. I have deja vu occur a lot. Just a lot of different experiences like that. One thing I remember very clearly as a child is hearing my name as clear as day, usually followed by me asking my mom why she was calling me, since the voice sounded female, only to have her tell me she never called for me. Just the other day, my dad asked me a weird question. He asked if I still had the dreams like I used to have. I wasn't sure what he was talking about, so I asked him what he meant. He explained to me that, apparently, when I was younger, I constantly had dreams about my past relatives, most of whom I had never even met before. I was even able to send along messages from my grandparents to my parents, for instance. I could give pieces of information about them that no one has ever told me about. My father then also told me that for a short while, he would hear me in my room talking to someone, and when he walked in and asked who it was that I was talking to, I would say Grandma, and act like this was completely normal. I don't actually know why I don't remember any of this, except for just little bits and pieces of it. I think it's because my mother, in particular, doesn't enjoy that type of talk, and had to try to refrain me from talking about it. My father seemed to be more supportive and believing in these types of things, and he was interested if I'd had any more of those dreams to see if I had any messages from any of our deceased loved ones. What this all boils down to is I've been wondering if it's possible that my family has some kind of spiritual abilities. It goes down as far as my great-grandma, as far as my mother's side goes. My mom finally told me about her horrifying account of a banshee, too. You see, she had a lot of weird things happen to her throughout her life, which is probably why she wasn't happy when her daughter started to experience those same types of things. It seems every woman in my family has experienced what they call the cry of the banshee. Apparently, there's this awful howling that radiates the entire house, and even outside, and it's so loud and terrifying that it makes you want to flee. But this scream just follows you wherever you go. It's supposed to be the banshee howling over someone's soon-to-be demise. That's what she told me anyways. My great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother all experienced this cry or howl at some point in their lives. When my mother experienced hers, she was home alone at the time. She said it was almost like a horrible wolf howling, and it was so loud that any room you went into, it just seemed to follow you in there. She told me how she went through the house, the basement, and even outside to try to figure out where this sound was coming from. But after an hour or so, right before my grandmother came home, it stopped. My mom waited outside for her, terrified, and explained to her what happened. My grandmother was very calm about the whole situation, and explained to her that our family is cursed by the banshee. A few days after that, my great-grandmother died. My mom thinks that banshee was warning her of her death. Another thing that happened to her was kind of like an omen, I guess. A few days before my grandfather died, my grandmother and my mother were in the kitchen, and my mom happened to look outside the window and saw the entire yard filled with crows. From what she told me, there wasn't an inch of the yard that wasn't covered in crows, and this was late December, so they shouldn't be there. A day or so later, right before Christmas, my grandfather died of a sudden heart attack. I haven't heard this cry or seen any omens like this, but I have had a lot of weird things happen in my life. Not too long ago, I was at a friend's house and I walked out into the hallway and saw a bird just sitting on the crown molding on the top of the hallway. Of course, I went to investigate, calling my friend to come and get it, and we both saw it fly into the room that we use for storage. It went behind an old dresser that we don't use, and I went to get it out so we could get it back outside. But it had vanished. There was no trace of the bird anywhere. I even turned to my friend to see if it possibly flew out of the room or anything, but he was just as stunned as I was. After we proceeded to go through the house, none of the doors or windows were even open. So how did the bird even get in there in the first place? We went downstairs and asked if anybody had seen the bird or anything, because it was a little odd that it was on the second floor and nobody had seen anything. I'm thinking a bird would be kind of hard to miss, don't you think? The thing is, when I saw it though, it was like I was compelled to look where it was. I mean, how often do I exit the bedroom and look across the crown molding? How about never? The only thing I could think is that when this happened, I was going through a rather difficult time in my life, and I took it to mean that either it was a sign for things to get better or things to get worse, given my family's previous history with birds. I haven't had a dream of someone contacting me since my grandmother passed. It was actually the most comforting thing that I can remember ever happening in my life. She came to me the day she died and told me not to cry for her, that she was in a better place, and didn't want me being upset about it. When I finally told my mom about this a few years later, she told me that while she was still grieving and was alone in the house, she heard my grandmother's voice call her name. It was as clear as a bell. My mom took it as a sign of her trying to console her. I'm still trying to figure out if it's possible for the women on my mom's side of the family to be sensitive or something, or possibly have something following us. I should mention too that her side is strictly of Irish descent. So what do you think is going on?
Paranormal things make for good stories to scare children, but real encounters with the paranormal make you question a lot of things. I don't know if this is truly paranormal or not, but I'm going to tell you something that me and my brothers had to deal with one night. I'm 30 years old. This happened in either 1999 or 2000, our first year in Fort Smith. I'm 12 years old, with my 11-year-old brother and 14-year-old brother. We all shared one big room because we weren't wealthy. We were all being pretty quiet and suddenly started to hear a voice clearly saying, "Help me, help me." It was creepy and caught us off guard, especially because we didn't have the TV on and no one else was around. Since we were just kids, we tried to ignore it, but it kept saying, "Help me, please help me," over and over again in a clear, small boy's voice. After a while, we were thoroughly freaked out. I had pinpointed the voice from a big window near our dresser, so me and my oldest brother grabbed a mop and broom to swing for protection. My younger brother had a heavy glass jar to throw and was standing behind us. We counted to 3, and my older brother flung open the heavy curtain. And it was a cat. A frigging cat. Now, I am no expert on cats by any means, but the way this damn cat spoke, it shouldn't have been able to. And, because of where the cat was, we were sure the voice was coming from this damn cat. Laugh. Say I'm pulling your leg. But I know for a fact this cat spoke clearly. And then it leapt off the outer windowsill when we pulled back the curtains. It wasn't even a black cat, just a black and white one. Not that it matters, because that night it made me hate cats for life. The second encounter also took place in Fort Smith, which is in Arkansas. I was just walking to a friend's house about 4 a.m. on Sunday. As I was walking down the street, not really paying attention, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I couldn't really tell what it was, so I kept staring at it. And the closer I got to this thing, though, I started realizing that it had a face, and I could see eyes. I still thought it might be a statue, so I continued to stare at it. When I got close enough, I could see it had really big eyes. The whites of this thing's eyes were huge, like golf balls. I told myself it was a creepy statue, and I kept walking closer and closer to it, getting more and more details as I went. It was short, probably about 3 feet. It was covered in rags, like really, really crappy looking rags. It seemed to be holding a cane or staff in its hand. That's why I kept telling myself it was just an ugly lawn ornament. It had an ugly face and didn't look nice. It looked like a saggy old person face. Very weird, not normal at all, especially those eyes. Its skin was black, and even though it was saggy, it still looked smooth. This thing really looked like it was staring right at me, even as I continued to walk. I kept telling myself it couldn't possibly be staring at me. It was all in my head. It was just a damn statue. So in order to shake off the creeps, I started talking out loud and I said, "Man, that is an ugly ass statue." So then I turned the corner that this thing was on and took another look back at it. That's when I saw that this thing really was alive. It turned to face me and my blood ran cold. A million questions in my brain whipped through in an instant because that damn thing was looking right at me. Oh hell no, I thought to myself. This isn't happening. I started thinking all sorts of things, like maybe it was a prank. Maybe someone was trying to play a joke on me or something. So I kept walking, trying to figure out what it was. I looked back again and it was still following me with its head. I had a bottle of water in my hand and paused. I thought about throwing it at it, and then I made the sign of the cross, hoping for God's protection. At this point, it was so dark that I could only see the whites of this thing's eyes, and when it got close enough, I started throwing the water, and I yelled, "Get out of here, demon," or, something like that. Honestly, I can't really remember exactly what I said, because it was so unbelievable while it was happening. Not that that's even an important part of the story, I just wanted to stress the fact that when I saw this thing, it kind of distorted my mind. As the water flew through the air, though, I remember watching it like it was in slow motion. The water hit the leaves around it, and I saw what I now think is the duende turn its head and move back into the shadows. I hear it mumbling something as it does, and I can no longer spot it. This thing was actually talking. I started moving away from it pretty quickly, looking over my shoulder and praying the whole time. God, please, don't let it come after me. Please protect me. My friend lives a block and a half from where this took place, and when I got there, I started banging on the door to be let in as fast as they could get to the door. And that's basically what happened. I never saw it again. My friend never saw it to begin with. I'm not sure if it's a duende. It could have been a gnome, I guess. But I described it to my brother, and he said it could even be a troll. I just know, growing up, my abuela always talked about the duende. I don't know what the hell it was. All I know is that I saw it. It was real. It moved and it spoke, and it came after me. And I was freaked out the whole time. And that's all I got. I have to get that off my chest. And it sucks that this happened so close to my home. What do you think it was I saw that night? It was a long time ago, but I still remember it so vividly that sometimes I even still have nightmares about it. I'd really like to know what the people that listen to your channel think it was. Was it a troll? Or a pissed off gnome? Or was it truly the duende that all my family used to warn me about?
About 12 years ago, I was camping by myself in Desolation Wilderness up near Wrights Lake in the El Dorado National Forest in California. At first, I was with some friends, but through a series of unfortunate events, I ended up alone while they went back down to Placerville for the night. A ranger that I had talked with gave me a great location to camp and fish, so I took his suggestion and headed there. But I knew I wouldn't make it there by nightfall, since I was on foot. I went in that general direction anyway, where he said to go. But I did end up getting just a bit lost. While I was hiking, I heard a stream near me and followed the noises. Then I found this beautiful spot that had a pool in the stream, and it was right near the tree line. I decided to head down that granite cliff to the stream and make my campsite there instead. Once my site was up, I fished for a little bit, and then I decided to call it a night and head over to my tent. It was a full moon that night, and I just watched the moon rise above the mountains and gazed at the brightness as I relaxed. Around 10:30, I decided to finally go to sleep. While I was trying to fall asleep, though, I heard this low growling noise. It sounded close, really close, and actually scared me. It sounded like the growl was directed directly towards me. I jumped up and grabbed my gun, which was a .45 compact, and looked out the mesh on the top of my tent. What I saw was about a 4 to 5 foot tall figure standing out on the edge of the tree line, which was only about 6 feet away from my tent. At this point, I figured it was a bear and yelled as loud as I could to try and scare it off as I climbed out of my tent. I fired a shot into a dead tree where I thought the bear was standing. It turned and ran, but not very far, which was really concerning to me. If you've ever had to chase off a bear, you know what I mean. When you shoot at them, they run off. This thing didn't run very far at all, maybe 50 feet or so. I could hear it moving through the trees until it just stopped. It was quiet for about 15 minutes, and I decided it was probably gone, and I could go back to sleep at that point. Not soon after that, though, I started hearing large rocks or something hitting the pool in the stream. It happened every couple of minutes. I could hear the cracking sound as the rocks hit the water and then hit the bottom of the stream pool. Now this was very concerning to me. I thought it was the bear circling me and trying to find another way into my campsite. I got out of my tent a few more times at this point to try and see if I could see any movement around me. Maybe on the other side from where I initially encountered the shape, but nothing was there. I tried using my flashlight, but it wasn't really getting the job done, since it only stayed lit for a couple of minutes. The handle of the flashlight was also clear, so that would light up too, and it made my visibility even worse. The moon helped me a lot though, and so did the white of the granite that was all around me. In fact, the only places I couldn't see that clearly were the areas of the forest where the trees were thick. All of this went on until about 2 a.m., until I got another visitor. This time I couldn't see any figures, but I heard something moving right around the area that I had encountered it before. It was extremely close again. I yelled at it, but this time, something responded back with a loud oof, oof. Whatever it was, sounded really deep. Again, I jumped out of my tent, but saw nothing. I still put another shot into that dead tree, and the creature ran back into the forest again, but only about 50 feet or so again. There was something odd about the way it moved too. When I think back on it, I don't think it was running on 4 legs. I think it was running away on 2 legs. It concerned me enough at that point though to realize something just wasn't right. Still, I was thinking I was dealing with a rogue bear, and started trying to figure out what it wanted from me. Did it think of food when it saw a tent? Was I in its territory or on its path it uses to go to the water? The place I was in was really clean. It didn't look like many hikers had been in this specific area, so I didn't think that the bear could associate my tent with food. At that point, I decided I was going to take my sleeping bag outside and move to that big slab of granite. There was about a 4-foot ledge facing the woods where all these activities were going on. The tree line would be about 50 feet away though, not 6. I figured this would at least give me a little bit of time if I was getting charged. Maybe I'd have a little bit of a warning. The rocks kept flying though. I couldn't sleep very well. I kept checking my watch, hoping the morning would come soon. I checked my watch all night long. And then, she showed up. It was about 4:40 in the morning, and something big moving around woke me up. I heard the movement where all this started, and peered over to the tree line. I didn't see anything at first, but when I looked over to my tent, this giant creature was standing there. My tent is about 4 feet tall. She was at least twice as tall as it. I'd say she was probably 7.5 feet tall. I couldn't see any features at first, but then this thing took a few steps towards me, and I almost peed myself. I picked up my gun and took another shot near it. It stopped and looked at me. Then it started moving towards me again. The distance in between this thing's strides made it seem like it was moving fast. It was just that big. If it had been a bear, I would have shot it right then and there on the spot. It would have dropped it stone cold. But I honestly didn't think my gun would do anything to this thing other than piss it off. I did take another shot though, hoping it would scare it away. And she stopped again. But now, only about 15 feet away from me, it was close enough to where I could see all of its features. Its face looked similar to a human. Its lips were about the same size as a human's, but the nose was wider. Its nostrils flared down like ours, not out like a gorilla's. The lower jaw was wider and longer than a person would be, though. The hair on its face reminded me of a beard, but the hair on its head, shoulders, and arms were longer. I'd put it anywhere from 3 to 8 inches. The hair wasn't thick like fur, and I could actually see skin underneath the hair in some places. It did have breasts, which made me know that it was a female. They were large and saggy, but everything for the most part was proportionate. But I know it was definitely a female. Her eyes looked brown to me, no white showing at all. They were about the same size as a human's would be, if our heads were that big. But still, with the size of the eyes and the head, they looked proportionate. They didn't look out of place. Her arms were longer than ours, though, and her fingertips almost touched her knees. The head was conical, but only from the side. When I faced her, I couldn't tell it was conical at all, and the back of her head looked mostly flat. The way her arms moved was different than a person's, though. They didn't bend as much at the elbow like ours do when we move. When she turned to look at the tree line, she only moved her head, and then the rest of her body followed after that. She didn't seem to be running for cover. She more just ran off over the granite in the same direction the whole time until she was out of sight. She took off to the northwest in scrub pines, and that was the last I saw of her. She did take off with amazing speed, though. Even with the stride she was taking, she was still moving faster than she did when she approached me. She was incredibly fast. I stayed up the rest of the night. My back was against the ledge. My gun was in my hand. I was shaking and scared. I stayed that way until it was late enough to hike the hell out of that area. For months, I wasn't able to sleep much. I still have trouble sleeping to this day. Sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still see her. I could still hear the noises she made. I could hear the rocks hitting the stream. I've been hunting and fishing most of my life, and I thought I'd seen everything in the forest, but nothing like this has ever made itself known to me before. And I hope nothing like this ever makes itself known to me again.